The John Deere dealer stood in front of me, with his arms crossed, looking at the work order on his clipboard. His face had that expression mechanics get when they're about to deliver bad news. The kind of face that says they've already made up their mind, and nothing you say is going to change it. 1 week minimum, he said, not even looking up from his paperwork. Could be 2 if we find other issues once we get into it. Parts are back-ordered from the factory. Best I can do for you. I felt my stomach drop like I'd just missed a step going downstairs. 1 week, maybe 2. I had 300 acres of soybeans standing in my fields, ready to harvest. The beans were at perfect moisture. Any day now, they'd start drying out too much, and I'd lose yield. And the weather forecast I'd checked that morning showed a major rain system moving in from the west. 5 days out. Maybe 6 if we were lucky. If I waited a week for this combine to get fixed, I'd lose half my crop to mold and weather damage. If I waited 2 weeks, I might as well not even bother harvesting. The bank doesn't care about weather delays or broken equipment. They just care about getting their loan payments on time. This is the busy season, I said, trying my best to keep my voice calm and reasonable. Can't you prioritize it? Rush order the parts. I'm looking at serious losses here. Serious money. He finally looked up from his clipboard, and I could see in his eyes that he'd heard this exact same plea from a dozen other farmers already that week. So is everyone else. Buddy, you think you're the only one with beans ready to come off. You're number 17 on my repair list. 17. I got guys who've been waiting longer than you. 1 week minimum, maybe 2. That's the best I can do. Take it or leave it. My name is Cole Henderson. I'm 41 years old, and I farmed 400 acres just outside Decatur, Illinois. Been doing it for 12 years now, ever since my father passed and left me this land. Every dollar I've ever earned is tied up in this operation. Every bit of equity, every ounce of hope for the future. That John Deere 9600 combine sitting in the dealer's service bay with its hood open and diagnostic cables running everywhere was supposed to be my ticket to modern, efficient farming. Top-of-the-line equipment when I bought it 5 years ago. Climate-controlled cab with air conditioning and a premium sound system. GPS-guided auto-steering, yield monitoring, grain loss sensors, all the bells and whistles that the salesman had promised would revolutionize my operation and pay for themselves in 3 seasons. Cost me $218,000, financed over 7 years at 6.9% interest. I was still making payments of $3,200 a month on that machine, would be for another 2 years. And now it wouldn't start. Wouldn't even try. Just gave me a series of angry clicks and error codes on the computer screen when I turned the key that morning. Dead as a doornail, right at the exact moment I needed it most. Right when 300 acres of premium soybeans were standing at perfect harvest moisture, waiting for me to get them out of the field and into the grain bins. The dealer had sent a service truck out to my farm that morning. Young technician named Brad, who couldn't have been more than 25 years old. He'd plugged his laptop into the combine's diagnostic port, frowned at the screen for 20 minutes, then shook his head. Main computer module is fried, he'd said. Happens sometimes. We'll have to tow it in and replace the whole unit. Can't fix it in the field. How long? I'd asked him, already knowing I wasn't going to like the answer. He'd just shrugged. Hard to say. Parts are coming from the factory in Iowa. Could be a week, could be longer. It's harvest season. Everybody needs parts. So they'd loaded my $200,000 combine onto a flatbed truck and hauled it away while I stood there in my driveway feeling sick to my stomach, watching my entire harvest season disappear on the back of a tow truck. I drove home from that dealership, feeling sick. Sat in my truck in the driveway for 20 minutes, just staring at my barn, thinking about all the money I'd spent on that machine, all the payments I still had to make, all the promises the salesman had made about reliability and uptime. My wife Sarah came out to check on me after I'd been sitting there for almost half an hour. She knew something was seriously wrong just by looking at my face through the truck window. 20 years of marriage will do that. You learn to read each other. The combine's down, I told her when she opened the passenger door. Computer's dead, won't be ready for a week. Dealer said maybe 2 weeks if they run into complications. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood there with her hand on my shoulder, looking out at the fields, same as I was. I could see her mind working, calculating, thinking through options the same way I'd been doing for the past 30 minutes. Then she said something that honestly surprised me. What about your dad's old Farmall? I actually laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it seemed so absurd. Dad's old Farmall M had been sitting in the very back corner of our oldest barn for probably 15 years, maybe longer. He'd used that tractor up until the mid-90s, plowing and planting and doing odd jobs around the farm, before he finally broke down and bought something newer with a cab and power steering. When he passed away 6 years ago and left me this farm, that old red tractor came with everything else. I'd kept meaning to sell it at auction or maybe scrap it for parts, but there was always something more urgent to deal with. So it just sat there, gathering dust and cobwebs, taking up space I could have used for something else. Sarah, I said, that thing is older than I am by a long shot. It's got to be what, 60 years old, 70, 68, she said, without hesitation. Your dad bought it, used in the spring of 1973, from a farmer up near Bloomington who was retiring. I remember him telling me the whole story. Said it was a 1956 model. Said the man he bought it from had kept it in immaculate condition. Your dad paid $1,200 for it and thought he'd gotten the deal of a lifetime. I'd forgotten she knew all that. Sarah had spent a lot of time with Dad before he passed, listening to his stories about the farm and the equipment and the old days. Stuff I'd been too busy to pay attention to back then. Even if it runs, I told her, and that's a big if. I can't harvest 300 acres of soybeans with just a tractor and that old pull-type combine that's been sitting next to it. That would take forever. We'd never beat the weather. How long would it take? She asked, and I could tell by her tone that she was seriously considering this, not just throwing out a crazy idea. I thought about it, did some rough math in my head. With the big John Deere 9600, I could normally harvest about 150 acres in a full day of hard work. 300 acres would take me maybe 2 long days if everything went smoothly. With the old pull-type setup, assuming everything actually worked, I'd be moving at maybe a third of that speed, maybe less. I thought about it. With the John Deere, I could do 300 acres in maybe 2 long days. With the old setup, assuming it even worked, I'd be looking at maybe a week of 16-hour days. Too long, I said. The rain's coming Friday. I'd never finish in time. Sarah looked at me with that expression she gets when she's made up her mind about something. She said, the dealer said 1 week minimum. That's 5 working days. If it rains Friday, you lose the crop either way. But if you start tomorrow morning with the old equipment, you've got 4 full days before the weather turns. Isn't 4 days better than sitting here doing nothing? She was right. I hated that she was right, but she was. I spent that evening out in the barn with my flashlight, looking at Dad's old Farmall. The red paint was faded and dusty. There were cobwebs on the steering wheel. The tires were dry-rotted and cracked. The exhaust pipe had a wasp nest in it. But when I checked the engine oil, it was still clean. Dad had always been meticulous about maintenance, even on equipment he wasn't using anymore. I found a notebook in the toolbox bolted to the side of the tractor. His handwriting, maintenance logs going back to 1973. Last entry was dated April of 2008, 2 months before he died. Changed oil, greased all fittings, started engine, runs strong. This old girl's still got plenty of life left. I felt something catch in my throat reading that. Dad's handwriting, his voice in those words. I pulled out the choke, turned the key, and pushed the starter button. The engine cranked over slowly, once, twice, 3 times, then it fired. Black smoke poured out of the exhaust for a few seconds, then cleared. The engine settled into a rough idle, then smoothed out. That distinctive sound of the old 4-cylinder engine. The same sound I'd fallen asleep to as a kid when Dad was working late in the fields. I sat there on that tractor for a long time, just listening to it run. Thinking about all the acres Dad had worked with this machine. All the harvests, all the years. The next morning, I was up at 4:30. Sarah made coffee while I hooked up the old pull-type combine to the Farmall. It was a Massey Ferguson Model 65 that Dad had bought used around the same time he got the tractor. I'd kept it stored in the same barn, covered with tarps. The combine hadn't run in just as long as the tractor, but Dad had maintained it the same way. I checked the belts, greased the bearings, cleaned out the chaffer and the sieves. By 6 o'clock, I was ready to try it. My neighbor Jim came over around 6:30. He'd seen me moving equipment in the pre-dawn light and got curious. Jim farms about 600 acres next to mine. He runs all new John Deere equipment, 2 combines, 3 tractors, all less than 5 years old. He walked up to where I was making final adjustments on the combine, looked at the old equipment, and just shook his head. "Cole," he said, "what in the hell are you doing?" I explained about the John Deere being down, about the dealer's timeline, about the weather forecast. Jim listened, then said, "Why don't you just use my backup combine? I've got my older 9510 sitting in the shed. You could have your beans done in 2 days easy." I appreciated the offer, I really did. But Jim was getting ready to harvest his own fields. If something happened to his primary combine, he'd need that backup. I couldn't put him in the same situation I was in. I told him thanks, but I'd manage. He looked at the Farmall and the old Massey Ferguson combine like they were museum pieces. "Cole, those things are from before Vietnam. You really think you can harvest 300 acres before Friday?" "I don't know," I told him honestly, "but I'm sure as hell going to try." Jim just shook his head again and walked back to his truck. As he was leaving, he called out, "Good luck, man, you're going to need it." I started cutting at exactly 7 o'clock that Tuesday morning. The sun was just clearing the tree line to the east, casting long shadows across the bean fields. The dew was still heavy on the plants, which wasn't ideal, but I didn't have time to wait for things to dry out perfectly. The old Farmall pulled that Massey Ferguson combine through the first row of soybeans at maybe 3 miles an hour, could have been slower. The John Deere would have done it at 5 or 6 miles an hour, easy, maybe more, in good conditions. But the old Massey Ferguson was actually doing its job better than I expected. Beans were coming in clean off the header. The separation looked good through the inspection window. The grain tank was filling up with clean soybeans at a steady pace. The whole setup felt different from running modern equipment. Everything was mechanical. I could hear every gear turning, every belt moving, every auger spinning. The Farmall's engine had this deep, rhythmic sound that was almost hypnotic. 4 cylinders firing in sequence. No computer monitoring, no sensors, just good old-fashioned mechanical engineering doing exactly what it was designed to do back in 1956. By noon, I'd managed to get through about 32 acres. I grabbed the sandwich Sarah had brought out to the field in a cooler, ate it standing next to the tractor without shutting anything down, and kept right on going. Every minute counted. Every row mattered. The heat that afternoon was absolutely brutal. Had to be pushing 95 degrees with humidity to match. That old Farmall didn't have air conditioning like the John Deere. Didn't even have an enclosed cab. Just a metal umbrella shade bolted to the frame above the seat that provided maybe a square yard of shadow that moved with the sun. My shirt was completely soaked through with sweat by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. My hands were already developing serious blisters by 3 from gripping that old steel steering wheel that had absolutely no power steering assistance whatsoever. But here's the thing. That tractor just kept running. That old 4-cylinder engine just chugged along, steady and reliable as a metronome. No computer error messages flashing on screens. No sensor failures shutting everything down. No warning lights demanding immediate attention. No mysterious problems that required a technician with a laptop to diagnose. Just pure, simple, mechanical equipment doing exactly what it was built to do nearly 70 years ago. By sunset Tuesday, I'd cut 85 acres. I was exhausted, my back hurt, my hands hurt, everything hurt. Sarah brought dinner out to the field. She sat with me in the truck while I ate, neither of us saying much. Then she asked if I was going to keep going. I looked at the fields, still waiting to be harvested. Did some quick math in my head. At this pace, I could finish by Thursday night if I pushed hard. That would give me a full day of cushion before the rain. Yeah, I said. I'm going to keep going. I worked until midnight Tuesday night, took a 3-hour nap in the truck, started again at 3 Wednesday morning with the tractor's headlights cutting through the darkness. Wednesday was harder than Tuesday. My body was screaming at me to stop. The blisters on my hands had broken open and were bleeding into the work gloves I'd put on. My lower back felt like someone was stabbing it with a knife every time I turned to check the combine behind me. But that old Farmall just kept going. No complaints, no breakdowns, just steady, reliable work. Jim came by again late Wednesday afternoon, probably around 4 o'clock or so. He'd been out harvesting his own fields all day with his fleet of modern John Deere equipment. His primary combine was a 9870 that was only 2 years old. Probably cost him close to $500,000 with all the options and technology packages. He pulled up alongside my field in his diesel pickup truck, got out, and just stood there at the edge of the beans, watching me work for a good long while. Didn't say anything, just watched. When I finally stopped to empty the grain wagon into my truck, he walked over across the cut stubble. "How much have you got done?" he asked, and I could tell he was genuinely curious now. Not mocking, not skeptical, just interested. "About 210 acres as of right now," I told him, checking the small notebook where I'd been keeping track. "Maybe 215, got somewhere around 90 acres left to go." He looked at me like I'd just told him I'd walked to the moon and back. "You've been out here for what, 36 hours straight, maybe more?" "Just about," I admitted. "Couple short naps in the truck, when I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore, but yeah, pretty much straight through. He was quiet for a solid minute, just looking at the old Farmall and the vintage Massey Ferguson combine hooked behind it. Both machines covered in dust and chaff. Both machines that belonged in a museum according to most farmers. Both machines that were somehow getting the job done. Then Jim said something I didn't expect. He said, "I came over here yesterday morning thinking you were being stubborn and stupid. Thought you were too proud to wait for the dealer, or too proud to take my offer to use my backup combine. Thought you were going to destroy yourself out here trying to prove some kind of point that didn't need proving. I waited for the but, because I could tell one was coming. But I've been watching you work these past 2 days," he continued. "That old tractor hasn't stopped once. Not one single time. Haven't seen you pulled over on the side of the field, working on it. Haven't seen any breakdowns. Haven't seen any problems at all. Meanwhile, my brand new 9870, through a belt tension sensor error, yesterday afternoon, cost me 2 full hours to reset the computer and get it running again. Then this morning my backup 9510 had some kind of GPS calibration issue. Another hour gone, while I tried to figure out what the computer was complaining about. You know what I'm starting to realize? Those old machines, like your dad's Farmall, they just worked. They didn't have 50 things that could go wrong. They didn't need software updates. They didn't require a technician with specialized diagnostic equipment to fix them. A good mechanic with basic tools could keep them running forever. I nodded. That's what my dad always said. Anything with a computer will eventually have a computer problem. Anything mechanical you can fix with a wrench. Jim helped me finish emptying the grain wagon, then headed back to his own farm. Before he left, he said, "I think you're going to make it, Cole. I didn't think you would, but I think you're actually going to make it." Thursday morning, I woke up to Sarah gently shaking my shoulder. I'd fallen asleep in the truck cab again. My neck was stiff. My whole body felt like I'd been in a car accident. "What time is it?" I asked. 5:30, she said. "You've got about 60 acres left. Weather forecast still shows rain, starting tomorrow evening." I dragged myself out of the truck and climbed back onto the Farmall. The engine started on the first try, just like it had every single time for the past 3 days. By noon Thursday, I was down to 30 acres. By 4 o'clock, I had 15 to go. At 7:30 Thursday evening, I cut the last row of soybeans. The sun was setting orange and red on the horizon. The fields were done. All 300 acres harvested in 3 days. I shut off the Farmall's engine and just sat there in the sudden silence. I couldn't quite believe it was over, that I'd actually done it. Sarah drove out to the field with our 2 kids in the truck. They ran over to me, yelling and excited. I climbed down off that tractor and hugged them so hard they complained I was squeezing too tight. That evening, I went back to the John Deere dealership. Not because I needed to, just because I wanted to. The same service manager was there, getting ready to close up. He saw me walk in and checked his computer. "Just wanted to let you know," he said, "we're still waiting on that part for your combine. Should be here Monday, maybe Tuesday." I nodded. "That's fine. I don't need it anymore." He looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean I finished my harvest. 300 acres. Done this afternoon." His eyes went wide. "You're kidding. How? Did you rent a combine from someone?" "Nope," I said. "Used my dad's old 56 Farmall and a Massey Ferguson Pult type." The service manager just stared at me. He didn't know what to say. "Those old machines," I told him, "they don't have sensors to fail, or software to update, or computers to crash. They just work. You sold me a $200,000 machine that couldn't make it through one harvest season. My dad's tractor that cost him $1,500, used in 1973, just did 300 acres in 3 days without a single problem. I'm glad your harvest is done, he finally said. But those old machines aren't practical for modern farming. I looked at him and smiled. Neither is waiting 2 weeks for parts. I walked out of that dealership and never looked back. The rain came Friday evening, just like the forecast predicted. 3 inches in 12 hours. It would have ruined every bean left in the field. The next week, I sold the John Deere combine, took a loss on it, but I didn't care. Used that money to buy 2 more old Farmall tractors and completely rebuild them. Got all the parts I needed from salvage yards and tractor shows. Everything was simple. Everything was mechanical. Everything could be fixed with basic tools in my own shop. Jim stopped by a few weeks later. He'd heard I'd sold the John Deere. He asked me if I regretted it, if I missed the air conditioning and the GPS and the fancy technology. I showed him my dad's old Farmall, sitting clean and maintained in the barn. Showed him the maintenance log I'd started keeping, just like Dad had done. This tractor is 68 years old, I told Jim. It's going to be running long after I'm gone. Can you say that about your equipment? He couldn't. Last spring, I got a letter in the mail from that same John Deere dealership. Some kind of customer satisfaction survey they send out to everyone who's had service work done. Bunch of questions about wait times and technician knowledge, and would I recommend their service department to other farmers in the area. There was a comments section at the bottom where you could write in additional feedback. I sat at my kitchen table with a pen for a good 10 minutes thinking about what to say, thinking about that day when the dealer told me 1 week minimum, thinking about how close I came to losing everything because of a failed computer module. Finally, I wrote, I recommend that farmers invest in equipment that actually works when they need it most. Equipment that can be fixed with a wrench instead of a laptop. Equipment that's built to last generations instead of designed to be replaced every 5 years. Your modern machines might be impressive, but my father's 1956 Farmall taught me more about reliability in 3 days than your dealership taught me in 5 years. Never heard back from them, didn't expect to. These days, when I'm out in the fields on that old Farmall running a disc, or pulling a planter, or just doing maintenance work around the farm, I think about my dad a lot more than I used to. Think about all the wisdom he tried to pass down to me over the years that I was too young and too stubborn to really hear when he was saying it, about how he stayed with the old equipment, even when everyone else in the county was upgrading to bigger and newer and fancier machines, about how he always said that debt was the biggest crop killer there was, worse than any drought or pest infestation, about how he'd rather fix something 10 times than replace it once, about how he was right all along about so many things. Sarah asked me once, maybe 6 months after that harvest, if I ever worried about the old Farmall breaking down at a critical moment, if I ever regretted selling the John Deere and going back to vintage equipment. I told her exactly what Dad told me when I was just a kid, probably 8 or 9 years old, and he was first teaching me how to drive that same tractor. I can still hear his voice saying it. Son, this machine was built back when they still made things to last. Built when a farmer had to be able to fix his own equipment because the nearest dealer might be 50 miles away on dirt roads. Built when reliability wasn't just a nice feature, it was the difference between feeding your family and losing your farm. This tractor doesn't know how to quit. It doesn't know how to give up. It just knows how to work. And if you treat it right and maintain it proper, it'll outlive both of us and still be running strong when your grandkids are farming this land. He was right about that too. That old Farmall is still running strong to this day. Still starts on the very first turn of the key every single time. Still pulls whatever implement I hook behind it without a single complaint. Last month, I changed the oil and greased all the fittings and checked the maintenance log I've been keeping, same as Dad kept all those years. The tractor now has somewhere around 14,000 hours on it, 68 years old and still working like it's barely broken in. Can't say that about much equipment made today. The dealer said 1 week minimum, maybe 2 if they ran into complications. That old Farmall said 3 days, and that 3 days made all the difference between keeping my farm and losing everything I'd worked for. I learned something important during those 3 days running that old tractor from dawn until way past dark. Learned that newer isn't always better, that complicated isn't always smarter, that sometimes the old ways, the simple ways, the ways our fathers and grandfathers did things, those ways worked because they were built on real wisdom, built on understanding what actually matters. What matters is reliability. What matters is being able to fix your own equipment. What matters is not being at the mercy of parts, suppliers, and service departments and diagnostic computers when your livelihood is on the line. Dad knew that, tried to teach me that, took me nearly losing everything to finally understand what he'd been saying all along. These days I tell that story to younger farmers whenever I get the chance. Tell them about the 3-day harvest, about choosing the old Farmall over waiting for the modern combine, about what real reliability means. Most of them look at me like I'm crazy, like I'm some kind of stubborn old-timer who refuses to embrace progress. But every now and then, one of them gets it. One of them sees the truth in what I'm saying. One of them starts asking questions about where to find old equipment and how to maintain it and whether those old machines can really compete with modern technology. And to those ones, I always say the same thing. The dealer said 1 week. The old tractor said 3 days. Which one would you trust with your future?